This is part 4 of Understanding Islam, Unpacking the Dhimma Pact. When I was working on this issue of the jizya and the dhimma for a number of years, one of the questions I ask is, were the reports that I was finding from so many different sources, so many different places, so many different times, were they truly representative of the whole range of Islamic views? And I was really thrilled some years into the project to discover this wonderful collection of commentaries, and we were able to check every single commentary that was a major commentary, and they all had the same view. There was no dissenting voice. So from the point of view of doctrine of Islamic law, this is the official view of Islam. This is normative Islam that I'm describing now. It's not an extreme interpretation. You have to throw away concepts like extremism in thinking about this. This is just Islam. Now we're going to look at the laws of the dhimma. We've examined the jizya payment. Remember, there are two parts of the surrender. One is to pay the tax and the other is to be humbled. And I'm going to be explaining what that humiliation looks like. Ibn Kathir's commentary is very widely used by English-speaking Muslims around the world today. And that's an interesting resource to access. It's on a number of different websites, very easy to find in English. He said on Surah 929 that paying jizya is a sign of kufr, which is a very offensive term, implying concealment and disbelief, infidelity and disgrace, he said. Allah said, and here he quotes from the Quran, the bits in quotations are from the Quran, until they pay the jizya, i.e. if they do not choose to embrace Islam, with willing submission, that is in defeat and subservience, and feel themselves subdued, that is disgraced, humiliated and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honour the people of the dhimma or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced and humiliated. Muslim, he's referring to the man who passed on a tradition. He recorded from Abu Huraira, a friend of Muhammad, that the Prophet said, do not initiate the salam to Jews and Christians. So don't say assalamu alaikum. Don't wish peace upon a Jew or a Christian. And if you meet any of them in a road, force them to its narrowest alley, push them off the side of the road. This is why the leader of the faithful, Umar bin al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, demanded his well-known conditions be met by the Christians, these conditions that ensured their continued humiliation, degradation and disgrace. He is referring to what's called the Pact of Umar, which is an early version or example of the Dhimma Pact document, which according to tradition applied to the Christians in Syria. And he's saying this includes a number of conditions upon Christians, and his point is that the purpose of these conditions is to make sure that they are humiliated. Some of the laws of dhimmis, the principles that apply to dhimmis include, under Islam, any Muslim who converts to Christianity or Judaism is subject to the death penalty. Conversions between faiths are also forbidden. People have a concession to keep their faith, not to change it to anything except Islam. It's forbidden to try to convert a Muslim from their faith. It's forbidden to hinder a fellow dhimmi from entering Islam. You see, when you do Christian mission, you are coming up against this spiritual stronghold, the restriction upon Christians from sharing their faith. A Christian man may marry a Christian or a Jewish woman, a Muslim man may marry a Christian or a Jewish woman, but their children are Muslims under law. It's a Muslim household, and it's forbidden for a Muslim woman to marry a Christian or a Jewish man. Anyone who converts to Islam could gain preferential inheritance rights within their family. They could inherit the family's property, and a spouse who converts gains sole guardianship of the children. No new churches are allowed to be built after conquest, and any damaged churches are not allowed to be repaired. This is a real issue in many Islamic countries, that it's very difficult to get permission to build a church, and Muslims will often object. In Egypt, you used to have the presidential approval to build a church. Now it's the governor's approval. In Indonesia, it's extremely difficult, and many churches are running without permits. Dhimmi houses are meant to be smaller and lower than Muslim houses. If you visit the Jewish quarter in parts of formerly Muslim Spain, you'll see they're very small houses that the Jews were living in. Dhimmis have to dress differently and more poorly than Muslims. They had to look different. They had to vacate their seat from Muslim, get out of the way, to adopt a humble appearance. It's forbidden on pain of death or amputation for a dhimmi to raise a hand against a Muslim. It's forbidden to curse a Muslim on pain of death. Dhimmis couldn't own or carry arms. They're not meant to have any means of self-defense. They're meant to be defenseless, and It's interesting in Iraq today, if a church has guards for their church, they'll employ Muslims, because employing Christians as guards with arms is sort of against Islam, and that would be an incitement, a provocation for Muslims to see that. The blood of a Muslim is not equal to the blood of a dhimmi. So, for example, although the murder of a Muslim is punishable by death, Sharia law states that no Muslim can be put to death for killing a Christian or a Jew. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote, Jews and Christians don't believe in Muhammad and Islam, so their blood and the Muslim's blood can't be equal. Saudi Arabia has a table which values the blood of every type of person. Muslim man is worth the most, a Muslim woman, a Christian man, Christian woman, Jewish man, Jewish woman, Hindu man, Hindu woman. They're all on a sliding scale depending on their status. If a dhimmi kills another dhimmi and then converts to Islam, he escapes punishment. Anyone who converts to Islam is let off from a potential death sentence in that situation. Christians are also not allowed to hold public office or exercise authority over Muslims, and that's why in Egypt today you'll find that it would be very rare to have a Christian school principal in a high school, or a Christian member of parliament, and gone are the days when Boutros Ghali was able to become a prominent person at the UN through Egypt. That's not the case anymore. Dhimmi testimony is not valid against a Muslim in an Islamic court. This principle applied throughout the whole Islamic world, and it's still a really big issue in Muslim countries today. If a Muslim accuses a Christian of a capital offence, such as trying to convert them or maybe insulting the religion, the Christian's own testimony is invalid in their defence. If a Muslim man tries to rape a Christian girl, her testimony is invalid against him. So this entrenches a principle that non-Muslims' versions of events are suspect and unreliable, but it also means that non-Muslims are incredibly vulnerable, because if you have an argument with your Muslim neighbour and he wants your land, he can make up some charge against you, such as you've blasphemed, and you're quite likely to be arrested and thrown into jail. This is happening in Pakistan all the time, and Pakistani Christians are suffering greatly from these kinds of abuses. Dhimmis have to house and feed Muslim soldiers according to the Dhimma Pact. They have to support the jihad. They're not allowed to support the enemies of Islam, and that's one reason why Christians are being killed by Sunni rebels in Syria today, because they've been supporting Assad, and the Sunni rebels claim to fight for Islam, so anyone who doesn't support them can be killed. They have no protection under the Dhimma Pact. Dhimmis are forbidden from any public display of their religion, no crosses, no funeral processions, no bells, no loud singing. If you look at photographs of Jerusalem from the 19th century, there are no crosses on any of the churches. When Hamas took over in Gaza, the Catholic Church stopped ringing its bells. Dhimmis are forbidden from teaching their children about Islam. You're meant to suffer the system, not understand it. Dhimmis are not allowed to ride horses because their heads would be above Muslims. In many areas, dhimmis were required to wear coloured patches on their clothes. This was invented by medieval Islam 1,000 years before the Nazi Party introduced it in Germany. So the Qadi Ahmad bin Talib in the 9th century in Andalusia compelled dhimmis to wear on their shoulder a patch of white cloth that bore the image of an ape for a Jew and a pig for Christians, and to nail onto their doors a board bearing the sign of a monkey. Ibn Ardun, also from Andalusia, said a distinctive sign must be imposed upon them in order that they may be recognised, and this will be for them a form of disgrace. Even in public baths, where people were naked, a tradition that carried on from Roman times, Byzantine times, non-Muslims had to wear a bell around their ankle or some other form of distinction to show that they were not Muslims. There are other manifestations associated with these disabilities. For example, it's very common for children to throw stones at non-Muslims. This is recorded in Palestine in the 19th century. Muslim children are sort of immune from any reprisal from the Christian, and the Christians or the Jews just have to put up with it. And even today, the Palestinian boys throwing stones at the IDF actually is a continuation of this tradition of saying, you are my dog, I can throw a stone at you, you dhimmi. Teaching of curses against Jews and Christians. Lane did an ethnography of Egypt in 1836, and he wrote about the curses, and he actually prints them in the book. And the curses are all about what will happen to the Christians when their dhimma is taken away, and we can loot their possessions and kill them and take their wives and children. May they be no longer protected. In Yemen, if Jewish children were orphaned, right up until recently, they had to be handed over to the Muslim community. The Ottomans used to take 1 in 5 of the boys from the Christian communities under their rule, like the Serbians and others. the Greeks and convert them forcibly, and they became slave soldiers. So many other abuses that were associated with dhimmi status. This describes the laws of the Dhimma that are discriminatory and work against Christians and Jews and others living under Islam. I've described the classical understanding of these laws. In practice, there's not a single Muslim nation in the world in which these laws to some degree don't apply. There's some version of this in every country. Even Indonesia, for example, very hard to get permission to build a church. And in some countries it's quite extreme. I'll explain and speak about some examples of how persecution abuses arise from these principles in a later section. Thank you.